Now we all know that there was a lot of times in the NBA where it could get dark. So dark in fact, they want to erase it from your mind. And from NBA players fighting with fans to a punch that ended an NBA player's career, I'm basically going to be telling you NBA stories, but they increasingly get crazier throughout the video. Now let's go ahead and start the first story. Now I'm pretty sure everyone probably heard this story before, but on November 19th, 2004, it was a regular season game between the Pistons and the Pacers. And let's just say, this was one of the craziest moments the NBA could barely even come back from. You see, this beef happened a couple months ago during the 2004 Eastern Conference Finals. The Pacers finished with the best record, and both teams were championship ready. This series was full of physical moments that, in my opinion, I think might have foreshadowed the infamous game that would happen a couple months later. The Pistons ended up winning this series and would later on beat the Lakers in the NBA Finals. This series lit a fire in the Pacers. Now coming back to the infamous regular season game. It all started when Ron Artest hit Ben Wallace with a hard foul during the closing seconds of the game. He responded by pushing him as hard as he could, and as tensions were escalating, Ron Artest decided to sit on the scorer's table to avoid conflict. But then shockingly, a fan threw a soda at him from the stands. And this was when things really got crazy because he went to confront the fan by charging at him. And I couldn't imagine a 6'7", 250-pound NBA player running at me. And this one cup of soda caused a brawl between fans and NBA players. There was literally a mix of fans throwing stuff while NBA players were throwing punches. It was getting crazy, so the game had to be called off and caused some of the longest suspensions in NBA history. Jermaine O'Neal was suspended for 25 games, Steven Jackson was suspended for 30, and the ringleader of all this, Ron Artest, was suspended for 73 games. This also caused an increase on security on NBA players and security measures on NBA arenas. Malice at the Palace 20 years later still remains as one of the darkest moments of NBA history. Now moving on to the next story, we're going to be talking about the NBA's problem with rigging, betting, and scamming. You may know about the 2002 series between the Lakers and Kings being rigged, but did you know that a year earlier, there was a scandal with just as much controversy the NBA kept hidden? Let me explain. You see, during the 2001 Eastern Conference Finals, the 76ers, led by Allen Iverson, who was the most popular player that season and won MVP that same year, literally carried his team to the Eastern Conference Finals that year. And on the other side, we have the not as marketable Milwaukee Bucks with a young Ray Allen. Sure, they might have had the second best record right behind the 76ers, but the only problem was they just didn't really have any aura, since they live in Milwaukee, which isn't really known for much. But in game 1 of the series, nothing really seemed wrong and everything was basically going smoothly. Ray Allen ended up with 31 points, while Allen Iverson ended off with 34. But when the series went to game 2, the Bucks started to dominate the 76ers. Ray Allen decided to go off and score 40 points with 6 assists, while Allen Iverson struggled a little bit, only scoring 16 points and 9 assists. And Allen Iverson ended up having a sore hip after this game. And the NBA didn't like the fact that a young Ray Allen was dominating their MVP player. So when the series reached game 4, there were a lot more weird calls that went in the 76ers' favor, like when Glenn Robinson was obviously fouled on this play during the 4th quarter, causing the 76ers to score in transition. Even the fans started to notice that the officiating was inconsistent. But in game 6, when Allen Iverson scored 40 points to force a game 7, many people think the refs made calls in the 76ers' favor. They mainly suspected a ref named Bennett Salvatos, who was rumored to be linked with Tim Donaghy, and he was also involved in the potential rigging of the 2006 playoffs. The same thing happened in game 7. Fans even celebrated ironically when calls were made. They knew this was cap. And even when the Bucks tried to complain, Ray Allen and George Karl were fined $100,000. And this made him come up with the theory that the NBA favored more popular teams. And this finals was sadly overwhelmed by even more popular teams, being the Lakers and Kings. And this series basically showed that in the NBA, you don't even have to be the best to win. And this is why we should never forget this series. Now moving on to the next story. You want to know why the NBA feels so soft nowadays? Let me explain. You remember the 70s through 90s NBA where it was more physical? And do you remember when NBA players used to have boxing matches in games? Why did they stop? Well, it was because during December of 1977, a punch ended this NBA player's career and partially ended the NBA era. You see, it was a regular season game between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Houston Rockets, so everything should have been cool, right? Well, things started to heat up. You see, during the second half, Rockets' Kevin Kerner and Lakers' Kermit were fighting over a rebound, and you know how things were done in the 70s. So Kareem saw this and tried to take the ball away from Kerner. And as Kerner was struggling to get free, Kermit Washington saw someone running full speed at him. So his natural instinct was to punch the person running towards him. And the player he ended up punching was a 29-year-old small forward named Rudy Tomjanovich, if I'm saying it right. And when this punch happened, the stadium felt silent, which was described as the loudest silence of all time. Kareem described this moment perfectly. He said it sounded like a watermelon being dropped on concrete. Tomjanovich was stunned and didn't even know what happened during this moment. He ended up suffering a mild concussion and he thought that something superhuman had hit him. Even though he went through all this, he surprisingly got up after this punch. And when the teams walked off the court, he asked them, "Why did you punch me?" And they ended up getting into an argument and had to be separated from each other. Tomjanovich was fighting for his life in the hospital, and it was so severe, spinal fluid was leaking from his brain, and he had to spend half a year fighting for his career in the NBA. He ended up surprisingly making it back on the court and even became an all-star 2 years later. But besides these moments, he was never the same after that punch and never made a full recovery after it, causing him to retire in his early 30s, battling depression and alcohol. And for Kermit Washington, he was suspended for 60 days and was fined $10,000. But me personally, I think he got off kind of light. The media hated him and the fans hated him even more, even receiving death threats. And this made it hard for the Lakers to defend him. He ended up getting sued by Tomjanovich, which earned him $3 million. And when this happened, this caused the NBA to go through a shift, going from a league known for fights to a more civil league. Players were punished way more severely with heavier fines and suspension. And today, they forgave each other and even became friends. That is why the NBA feels so soft nowadays. But this isn't the end of the story, because it turned out he was sentenced to 6 years in prison for stealing $500K from African kids in a charity fund. Now moving on to the last story, I'm going to be telling you the tragic tale of the NBA's biggest what if that passed away before he could even step foot on an NBA court due to an overdose. And let me explain it real quick. From the 1970s to mid-1980, this was the era where white powder was popular. During his career, he was addicted to it. During his time at Maryland, he was the most dominant college basketball player at the time. He wasn't as good as freshman year, only averaging 7 points a game with 48% efficiency, but skipping to his senior year, he was not guardable, averaging 23 points a game with 7 rebounds. Comparing that to Jordan's stats, Jordan averaged 13.4 points a game and 4 rebounds in his freshman year, but skipping to Jordan's senior year, he was averaging 20 points and 5 assists a game. And comparing them both physically, he could do everything Jordan could do but 2 inches taller, being 6'8", while Jordan was 6'6". And not to mention, he was also a better shooter. He ended up declaring for the NBA draft, where he was selected second by the Dynasty Celtics, who were coming off their 3rd title. They were basically unbeatable. They had Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish, and finally, Len Bias. But this joy didn't last for long and turned into one of the saddest what-ifs of all time. Because 48 hours later, he was a future millionaire and was hanging around the wrong people. He ended up partying since he was the 2nd pick by the Celtics dynasty. The people around him were peer pressuring him to sniff that white stuff. It ended up being too strong and he suffered many heart attacks during this night. And at 6:30, a person named Brian Tribble called 911 asking, "You gotta bring him back to life. He can't die," quote unquote. 911 ended up showing up 20 minutes later and took him to the hospital. He was gave everything but still nothing. It was too late and he was pronounced dead after this. And when this story hit the media, everyone was shocked. And this made scouts and coaches pay attention to the players' lives off the court. Do you think Len Bias would have been better than Jordan? Let me know in the comments if you have an opinion on this. And that's it.